Hello and welcome. In 2000, a company was set up with a clear intention to get rid of the paper invoice. 12 years on, this company is a strong market leader in electronic invoicing, boasting clients like Hewlett-Packard, GlaxoSmithKline, Kraft, and Kellogg's. The company is, of course, OB10. And 18 months ago, it was joined by Luke McKeever, who has picked up the mantle as CEO to take the OB10 network forward. Luke is joining me today. Hello, Luke. Coming from a customer-centric marketing background where analytics has played a chief role, and having been involved in a number of merger and acquisition activities, it will be very interesting to learn how his background has or perhaps has not influenced his thinking at OB10. So let's find out. Luke, this is a very busy market. Some might say it's a crowded market on the network side. And of course, SAP has recently acquired Ariba. Basware has announced the recent acquisition of Certipost. In your opinion, has major consolidation in this market actually begun? And if so, where does this leave OB10?
Okay, it's a good question. I think it's a very hot one at the moment. I'm sure you're following too. I'm not sure major consolidation is marked by the largest ERP provider buying the largest P2P vendor and potentially a relatively small number of acquisitions by Basware. But I do think the consolidation would really begin when large new entrants with real money make a play, or when the private equity world really gets interested. And my sense is they're still at an early stage, but they're definitely watching closely, and I think the next 12 months will be key. At the moment, there are still more entrants than there are consolidated companies, so the effect on OB10 of new and serious money coming in would be very exciting for us. I think it can only be good for us and for the industry as a whole, because I think new money would bring new opportunities for growth, and we'd certainly have some ambitious plans to grow with that. So I think that the isolated examples we've seen are a ripple, and we may see further push, but it does require new money, and it does require interested parties wanting to enter the space.
And you were talking about perhaps with isolated events happening, so the activities that's taken place so far, where does that indeed leave OB10?
Well, right today, it leaves us in a position where I think that, if you talk about, if we're referring to our competitive landscape, then I think it leaves us in a very strong position, and I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on that, if I may. I think classically within the competitive world that we all operate within, it's very easy to pigeonhole competition into different compartments or buckets, and I think it suits us for the competition to underestimate our abilities, because it serves to kind of undermine the pitches that get used against us. But I think we're also guilty in the current climate of grouping our competition into too simplistic a view. We sort of refer to the kind of giant jack of all trades, that master of none approach, or the smaller organizations that consistently change their opinions on topics. But they also all have good things to offer, and I think that the new money consolidation model that might affect will begin to shake things up. It'll take away some of the obvious demarcation that exists there today. And I think if you believed what you hear, then every single customer that OB10 had ever had would have had terribly unsuccessful e-invoicing projects, and they're all very unhappy and the like. And of course, that's just not the case. I think we stand by the results that we've had, and I know our customers do too. We've got dozens and dozens of buyer customers providing a reference on a frequent basis about their project successes, and we've got more new supplier enrollment projects happening today from our existing customers than ever before. So the energy and commitment is there. But one thing's for sure, I think in the space that we trade in today, it's really hard for buyers and suppliers to believe in everything that they read. I think in pioneering industries, any pioneering industry, you get cowboys, you get organizations that promise the world and may or may not ever have to deliver against their promises. It's very easy to attack establishments when you're unencumbered by sort of reality, and there are a couple of those. But the merger of SAP and Ariba is also really fascinating for us to watch. I think clearly in the short term, it's been good for OB10, as I'm sure it's been good for other competitors, because along with a record number of wins that we've had against them of late, buyers are trying to work out what effect that merger is going to have on the overall capabilities, on the duplicated competencies. And I'm never sure those big mergers work. I mean, they occasionally do, of course they do, and we've got to anticipate that it will, but I think it'll take time, and it's about getting their front line aligned, and that genuinely could take years. But it means that we have to continue to sustain our knowledge and our technology and our expertise advantages over them to cement our place as that best of breed choice, because a big competitor is always a scary thing. I think outside of the sort of categories of the younger upstarts and the big organizations, the competitive activity that we see, driven by investment for sure, but it's still new competitive activity, it differs by region, and we see different trends in different markets. And one thing is certainly for sure, and it's something that we've espoused for a long time, that the invoice itself is not the end goal. It's payments, finance, discounting, supplier rationalization, risk management. Those are the sorts of outcomes that are being driven by invoicing. And our landscape around us, the competitive landscape, is reflecting this more and more, with different entrants coming in with completely different standpoints, and electronic invoicing being just a component of a broader service offering for those companies.
Okay, that takes me on to a number of other questions. So I just want to reflect back on a number of points that you've made there. So it's being suggested from what you're mentioning that there are many messages being kind of beaten out into the market, that a buyer out there, a large organisation looking at electronic invoicing, needs to filter through and decipher what is relevant and what is relevant to their own organisation. So let's just focus on the buyer for a moment. Yeah. It's obviously a maturing market. OB10's been running for 12 years now, so we've known about the network model for over a decade now. So it's conceptually not a new thing. So therefore, you would think it'd be easier for the buyer to go out and actually sign up to a network like OB10, for example. But in your opinion, with all these messages being made available, the crowded market space, maybe a little bit of uncertainty as to what differentiates one network from another. How do you think the buyer is actually affected by the competitive landscape, and what would your advice to the buyer be?
That's a great question. I think just as a point of fact, I think there's plenty of space for multiple parties or service providers like our own to operate, and actually we continue to see the same names in RFIs as we saw 18 months ago. So I'm not sure there's been that much change in the recent history. I obviously can't go back beyond 18 months. I think from a buyer's point of view, it has to be a good thing. It has to be a good thing if they've got the information they need to make the right decisions. The challenge they face is that we're not all offering the same service, but if you read and concentrated on the marketing spiel, you'd think that everybody did exactly the same thing. And frankly, some of the marketing messages out there are really very good. And so, if you only went by what you read, you'd think that there were tiny organisations were enormous, and enormous organisations were, the size of the British government or whatever. I think if you're a buyer, the benefits of having multiple parties to talk to is you learn, and I would triangulate as many points as possible. I think if I was sitting in the shoes of somebody starting for a program for the very first time, I'd meet with the top 10 organisations straight off, and I'd understand how they approach the matters of enrolment, the matter of compliance, of support for them as an organisation. Because when you're embarking on a change like this, it's invariably underestimated. And I know if people are focused on service, then they emphasise their service offering. If they're focused on software, they emphasise the value of the software and defocus their attention, on, if you like, on the service component. So it's certainly trickier for them than it would be if there was only one model. But if they do it right, they listen appropriately, and they decide what they want out of a program, then there's many more opportunities than there are disadvantages.
Okay, and also just referring back to the crowded market that we currently have, and a number, I'm sure, many RFPs coming to you on a weekly basis. In your opinion, how is that affecting both pricing, but also kind of improved service that's being rendered to the buyer as a result of that?
I think pricing, it's interesting. I think there seems to be a dichotomy between public and private sector at the moment, and I'm not sure that that's here to stay. But it's an interesting observation. I think that there's a sense that the public sector suppliers, as they're doing a service to government, ought to be using a service for free. I think that's way too simplistic. I think it's a bit like saying if you're a public sector provider or supplier to the public sector, you also need to get tax-free, you need to get your gas free. I don't know where you physically draw the line on whether that is a credible story. Ultimately, it's about value. Do you want to do it because it's giving you some improved service, benefit of early payment, transparency of invoice status, whatever it might be? And I think whether it's free or not, it is debatable. And I also know for a fact, having run a number of programs for our organization where we have extended free invoicing, and the buyer has effectively picked up, the public sector organization has picked up the fee, and when we've done it with charges, there's almost zero difference in enrollment. So I think it's probably a little bit of a red herring. But that's the pricing where we see an interesting dynamic as governments get involved. I think in the private sector and the corporate world, there's very little change over the last 18 months. If we look at our average transaction price, if we look at our average fees that we generate as a business, they're the same as they were 18 months ago. So I think there's still enough opportunity out there for buyers. I think the buyers will ultimately hold the upper hand, and that's right to do so. They should hold us all accountable. But they hold us accountable because the way that we charge, and I'm sure others do too, is based on usage. So if they don't benefit from the system, they don't pay OB10 any money. So it washes through, and I think that price model probably won't be changed. I think on the service side, the competitive landscape has forced us, and I'll use that word forced quite strongly, to expedite some activity that we would have otherwise perhaps taken longer to bring to market. So I think what's been great to see is that buyers have come with us over the course of the last couple of years a new set of requirements, specifically around the long tail and the enrollment of smaller suppliers with smaller volumes of invoices. And we've had to raise our game, and we've really enjoyed that. I mean, you mentioned in your introduction my background is in analytics and database marketing. It's all I've done for the last 20 years before joining, and so being able to put inside people I've worked with in the past and disciplines and systems and technologies to enable the enrollment of small suppliers has been a real thrill, and we've generated some fantastic results. Would we have done it as quickly? Possibly not. So I'm sort of grateful on that level that we've managed to see an opportunity to enroll, and our goal stays the same. We want to help our clients to reduce or eliminate paper invoices. And I think from a client's point of view, the service has improved from OB10 as a result of seeing alternative ways of doing things, and so we're grateful for that. So I think it's almost certainly going to be a good thing for them.